Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, wherever you find your podcast. Happy Lunar New Year. We want to wish everybody out there a happy Lunar New Year. We want to also wish you a happy Black History Month. We are kicking off Black History Month with our guest, Michael Cottman. He is here to celebrate Segregated Skies, David Harris's trailblazing journey to rise above racial barriers. Before we invite Michael into the studio, we want to invite you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. What can you find at readingwithyourkids.com? Well, we just added this brand new player on the homepage, so when you arrive at readingwithyourkids.com, you can listen to our entire library of episodes. That's over 1,300 episodes, like 600 or 700 or 800 hours worth of content. Interviews with amazing authors. It's just incredible. I'm so blessed. What else can you do at readingwithyourkids.com? Well, you can check out our Certified Great Read Wall of Fame. If you're looking for a brand new book to add to your family library, that's a great place to start. You have so many wonderful books that have made it to our Wall of Fame. If you are an author, you can find out how we can help you celebrate your book here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. So many different ways to do it. You can be a guest. You can submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel. You can also take part in our monthly promotion programs. Oh, you can also sign up for our free newsletter at readingwithyourkids.com and check it out. You can also send us a message. We have a contact button right at the top of the page. You can let us know who your favorite guest was. You can let us know if we made a mistake not too long ago, one of the listeners let us know that a link on our webpage was incorrect. We were able to correct it thanks to her help, and we sent her and her family a great book to say thank you. Join us today at readingwithyourkids.com. Join us right now from the Annapolis area in the wonderful state of Maryland. Our guest today is here to celebrate a really important book for our middle grade readers. It's called Segregated Skies, David Harris's trailblazing journey to rise above racial barriers. Please welcome to the show, Michael Cottman. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Jed. I really appreciate it.
I'm excited to have you on. David Harris sounds like a pretty amazing person.
He is. He really is. The one thing I'll tell you that I love about David's story is that it's inspiring, it's uplifting, it's motivational, and it has adventure. You want that too. So it gives young readers an opportunity to say, I can do this too. David Harris, rose to these heights, right? And if he can do it, I can do it. And that's David's story.
That's wonderful. Now, when did David break this barrier?
Yeah, David was hired by American Airlines. He was a military pilot. I should tell you that first. Mm-hmm. He was in the military for several years. And in the 1960s, early 1960s, David left the military and decided that he wanted to be a commercial airline pilot. But at that time, there were no African American, there were no black commercial airline pilots with a major airline. So he interviewed with a number of different airlines back in the day. And American Airlines hired him in 1964. And keep in mind, remember that was at the height of the civil rights movement, mm-hmm. right? And so it was a very tense moment in history when David decided to make this move. But he says that during the interview, David's a light-skinned black man with green eyes. People didn't know at that time that David was actually black. And I think one of the most courageous meetings that David had was with the recruiter with American Airlines when he let the recruiter know that he was black. David didn't have to do that, mm-hmm. right? He could have just passed, as they called it.
Mm-hmm.
And so American Airlines hired him. And he says that the recruiter says, I don't care if you're black, white, or chartreuse. Can you fly an airplane? And David says, absolutely.
Well, in reality, that's the only question someone hiring a pilot should ask.
You are absolutely right. And that was David's point, and that's one of the points of the book, that he is a skilled pilot. He's great at what he does. He excelled to the rank of captain only after a few years at American Airlines and retired as a captain after 30 years. He had a tremendous, successful career with American Airlines. But his point was, I'm a pilot, and I'm good at it, and I should have an opportunity to show that. And that's the basis, right?
Yeah. How did you learn about David and his story?
What a blessing. I have been a good friend of mine, Lynn May, who was David's ex-wife, invited me down to Atlanta once just to meet about magazine ideas, really. Lynn is a phenomenal woman journalist in her own right, former PBS anchor, and she's an ideas person, just a wonderful person and an ideas person. And she said, Michael, I've got an interesting magazine story maybe for you. Let me tell you a little bit about my ex-husband, David Harris, who was a pilot with American Airlines. So she encouraged me to call David, which I did that next day. And I figured, we'd have a 5, 10, 15-minute conversation maybe to get to know each other. We spoke for more than 2 hours. So I called Lynn back and just said, Lynn, you are fantastic. I really appreciate you connecting me with David. And she says, well, yeah, I was thinking, even beyond a magazine story, do you think this is something bigger? And she says, maybe it's a book. And I said, great minds think alike. I'm thinking the same thing. I took some notes. I called my agent and then called my editor at National Geographic, and just to kind of bounce it off of them to see what they think, as I usually do. And they embraced the idea immediately and just said, we think this is a great, great opportunity and a great book to tell a wonderful, inspiring story to uplift young readers.
Yeah. I'm imagining that it might have, we're celebrating the fact that he broke the barrier in commercial airlines. I'm imagining he had to break some barriers to become a military pilot.
You're absolutely right about that too. He was one of the few African-American B-52 bomber pilots during that time. And remember, David came after the Tuskegee Airmen in the 1940s, right? And David often says to me, he has said this to me a couple of times, he shouldn't have been the first black commercial airline pilot. It should have been one of the Tuskegee Airmen. But during that time, they weren't hiring black pilots, and the Tuskegee Airmen were flying overseas, right, fighting for our country. But when they returned, they weren't being hired in the aviation field. And so David says, I stand on their shoulders, right, because these are the people who are my heroes. And so yes, so the military was huge for David to learn to learn how to fly. Right, and to learn how to fly a variety of different aircrafts, and that prepared him for his position at American Airlines.
Yeah,
but he does not forget. I have to underscore this. He does not forget, and I love this about David, about the history of the Tuskegee Airmen and how proud he is of this group of black pilots. And his point is, he wouldn't be here today at this job if it wasn't for the Tuskegee Airmen.
I think that's a really important lesson for kids to read about. I think it's an important lesson for grown-ups to read about. Nowadays, it seems like there's so many people in the media, in the spotlight, that are just like, yo, look at me, look at what I'm doing, and not recognizing the people who help them achieve what they're celebrating. That's
an excellent point. I'll say this about David that resonated with me, and it struck me when I met him. He's so humble. He's a humble man. And I spent 2 years with him, by the way, talking to him and researching and trying to get an understanding of his career and why he loved aviation and why he continues, by the way, to speak to kids. So he loves going to schools. He hasn't done it recently unfortunately, because of COVID. But prior to that, He would travel around to schools in the area, local schools, to talk to kids about flying. And he makes these paper airplanes, kind of cute, makes these paper airplanes and kind of teaches them the physics, of flight, through these paper airplanes. And they seem to love it. But he's a humble man. And you're right. I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you for that. Because he doesn't brag about what he does. Mm-hmm. He just tells his story. And his story, again, is just so inspirational and uplifting that I'm sure it'll resonate with people across the country, I hope.
Well, one of the things I've learned in the almost 100 years I've been here on Earth is that you really shouldn't have to brag about your accomplishments. If you've done something, that those accomplishments speak for themselves.
Yeah, it does. And, the people that he has touched along the way. I mean, he tells these stories. He tells a story once about a woman passenger on one of his flights, American Airlines flights, who was afraid to fly. And she had this deep fear of flying. And the flight attendant talked to David about it and said, what should we do? Trying to calm her down. But David left the cockpit and walked back to the coach section and talked to her, held her hand for a minute, I think, and just told her everything's going to be fine. And he talked to her about the redundant safety features of the aircraft. And I believe he actually asked her to come to the cockpit so she can get a look at the cockpit and show the controls, and said, this is safe, and let me show you why. And he takes her back to her seat, and she was fine. And I thought to myself, who does that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who does that? What a compassionate person.
Yeah.
To be able to do that. You've got 200 people on the flight. This is just one passenger, mm-hmm. right? But he wants every passenger to feel safe.
Yeah. You mentioned that David has a real passion for flight. What does he love about it so much?
We talked about that. It's such a wonderful question. He likes being in the air. He likes soaring, right? He likes being able to get high with the clouds, and in the air, flying high in the clouds, looking down on homes and green grass and pastures maybe below. He loves the sense of being free, I think, and flight gives him a sense of freedom. The other thing is that, he told me he also likes making sure that people get from city to city safely, to bond with their family members, right? To attend weddings, or funerals, or graduations, celebrations, Christmas, holidays. So he says he loves transporting people, and he loves when they get off the plane. He would love leaving the cockpit and saying goodbye to every passenger and have a great day, and hope you had a great flight. Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does. It's amazing. We take so much in our lives for granted, and the idea that we can get on a plane in Maryland or Massachusetts and fly across the country and be in Los Angeles in just a few hours, when not all that long ago for a person to get from the East Coast of the United States to the West Coast involved a boat ride down to Central America, then a hike across Panama onto another boat, and then up the coast to California. A journey that would take maybe a month or two. We're really living an amazing time, and we just don't appreciate that.
I agree. David tells a great story about one of the few flights that his father took, the only flight that he took with David, and it was overseas, and I believe it was Spain. And his father was in first class, and David said that loved his dad. Dad loved him. He came out to make sure that everything was fine, and that maybe he had a soda and a little bit of food, and just wanted to be comfortable. And David said that he came out on this long, international flight, and looks at his dad, and his dad looked at him and just says, "Son, I am just so proud of you." And David said, "I can't believe it. I'm a captain, with American Airlines, and I'm turning into a puddle here." My dad told me on the flight, "I love you. I love you, son." Right? And he said, they would go back in the cockpit and, get my act together, But he said it was a wonderful moment. And So there are those kinds of stories too, even involves a little bit, the book, a little bit of parenting, at older ages, and the connection between fathers and sons.
Yeah. What was the most surprising thing you learned about David in the 2+ years that you had a chance to speak with him in creating this book?
There's a really, really good question. Well, you don't make it easy, do you? No. Such an excellent question. I think what struck me most was his number one, his humility, and number two, the stories that he told me of racism and discrimination and how he had to overcome that racial adversity during the 1960s, and how he told me that he wanted just to stay focused on making sure that he had a great career, making sure that he was able to put food on the table for his family, right? And buy a nice house for his family, raise his family in a way, and sort of compartmentalize the racism that he was experiencing, understanding that he was under tremendous stress during that period in our history. And so it just struck me that he was so calm, no pun intended, in the eye of the storm, and that really, really resonated with me. And I just thought, what an amazing man. And now keep in mind, he's telling me this, decades later, but it was also important for me when I spoke to and interviewed Lynn May, his ex-wife. She told me about that in real time, that he was able, seriously, just to kind of take a break. I'm not saying he wasn't upset, and I'm not telling you he wasn't angry, but he didn't let that impact studying for his pilot's license, for example, or preparing for the interview for American Airlines and other airlines. So anyway, go on. I'm sorry.
I'm wondering, where do you think he learned that skill? There are so many other people justifiably became angry and acted out and weren't able to kind of stay as focused as you're telling us that David was. Was there somebody, you talked about his great relationship with his dad, was, there are other people in his life that taught him that skill, or was that something that was self-taught, do you think?
I think a combination of both. I think his father, I think there were other people in his life, other relatives, maybe cousins, uncles. But some of it, I think, was self-taught because some of the other people in his life did not experience exactly what David was experiencing. He tells a story in the 1968 or so, during the riots across the country, and it happened to be civil unrest in Washington, D.C., and he says he sees the fires. He's in the left seat, obviously, the captain, looking out of the window and sees the fires, and I think it was the control tower that let him know that there was an uprising, and he was landing at National Airport in Washington, D.C., and his co-pilot, who was white, said some disparaging things about Martin Luther King and being assassinated, and seemed to be happy about it. And so here's David. I mean, think about that. Trying to land a plane, right, in the middle of a riot, with his co-pilot, saying racist and discriminating things about Dr. Martin Luther King, and he's got to stay focused and land this plane and keep these people safe. And so, could somebody teach him that? No, I don't think so. This is something that he literally, things that he's learning, right, how to cope and how to deal with as it's happening in real time.
You bring up a point that is really heartbreaking for me. David was experiencing this in 1968 and learning how to overcome it. And in so many ways, we've come, as a society, we've come a long way from that point. But in other instances, we really haven't. We're still dealing with racism. We're still dealing with civil unrest that, was sparked by the murder of George Floyd. How do you think David is reacting to that? How does that make David feel now, if you know?
I do. I have a pretty good, I think, grasp on it. David was instrumental. years ago in working with American Airlines, or at least trying to get American Airlines to hire more black pilots. And it was a struggle. Moving fast forward here, David and I have talked about that. And even though there are many, many more black pilots, which is great, his point is that there's still a lot more work to be done in the workplace in corporate America with moving black people, African Americans and black men in particular, to senior positions around this country in corporate America. There's a lot of work to do in that area, and David talks about that a lot. Making sure that young people see, and especially young people of color, so young people, period, but young people of color in particular, seeing people who look like them at high levels, like so they can aspire to do the same kinds of jobs or achieve the same success or excel to the same positions that some of these people have. So David talks about that to this day. He talks about George Floyd. He talks about racial discrimination. He talks about black men being shot, unarmed black men being shot. And so we've had some long conversations about where we are with the state of racial reckoning right now in America and what should be done about it. He's got some very profound thoughts and ideas, and he's very passionate about that issue. So thanks for bringing that up.
I'm wondering, Michael, you've had this unique opportunity to spend so much time with somebody who's so inspirational. And I know young people reading this book are going to be inspired and have their lives changed. How has your life changed through your relationship with David?
I've spent the majority of my career writing stories and writing books that are uplifting, that I believe that are inspirational and engaging and thought provoking. And I'm glad you asked this question, because I told David this. It not just only validated what I do, and I enjoy doing it, but David encourages me and it makes me want to continue to do what I'm doing even more. I mean, just put the foot to the pedal and, find as many, more inspirational stories as I can. And there's only one of me doing particular stories. So, I'm trying to grab hold of, all these great story ideas that I can and get them out there in as many platforms as possible. But that's one. And then number two, the other thing that I took away and learned about David was staying focused, on your ideals. David, the other word that I wanted to tell you that I thought about, I didn't mention this earlier, is integrity. David's got integrity, and I love that about him. And we talk about that. So, So one of the things is just, I keep driving, keep moving forward, keep finding positive stories to share with our young people, to keep our young people engaged and encouraged and want to get out there and get up every morning and say, maybe, I have stories to tell. I can be a writer, or I can be an aviator, or I can be a pilot.
Yeah, I think that's a great message for families. We're going to be releasing this interview during Black History Month. I think that this is a book and this is a story that every family would benefit from sitting down and reading together. Not necessarily out loud, but that wouldn't be a bad way to read this story, but certainly co-reading it and sitting down at the dinner table and having conversations. What kind of conversations do you think a family can have after or during reading Segregated Skies?
I think that they can have conversations about what is an American hero. David, in my mind, in my heart, is an American hero who just happens to be black. But all people should be able, I think, to relate and feel uplifted by David's story. So that's one. Number two, I'll return to just one thing I mentioned earlier, and that is perseverance. that when there are obstacles in your way and adversities, how do you work around it? How do you figure out a way to work around a problem and solve a problem and get it done? Study. David worked very, very hard in the classroom long before he got into an airplane. So study hard, learn your craft, be the best, spend that extra time, go that extra mile. Those are conversations that I think families can have together.
Yeah. I love that idea of perseverance. One of the things we hear these days is that so many kids, so many young people are just, looking to leave school and walk right into the CEO office and become the CEO of something and not sitting down and working their way up and really learning their craft. So I think that's a really important lesson for all of us to learn and to remember.
It is. That is so true. David does talk about that, and you're absolutely right about that. I've talked to parents about that with some of their young kids, that they want to start at the top. And David's point is that no, you start at the bottom and work your way up, mm-hmm. and learn everything that you can, mm-hmm. Along the way.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I want to learn is where can we go to find out more, not only about Segregated Skies, but find out more about Michael Cottman.
Yes, you can find more about me on my website, michaelhcottman.com. You can buy the book on Amazon.com. Segregated Skies is being sold on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. So those are two great places that you can find the book.
Well, we've had a really, really wonderful time speaking with the author of Segregated Skies, David Harris's trailblazing journey to rise above racial barriers. And we've been speaking with the author, Michael Cottman. Hey, Michael, thank you so very much for taking time to be with us today.
No, thank you. I really, truly appreciate it. It's been my honor, and I've enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We'll be celebrating World Read Aloud Day with the Senior Vice President for Literacy Initiatives at Scholastic Publishing, Dwayne Millard. It's a fascinating conversation. It's a really fun conversation. You don't want to miss it. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, we would love it if you could subscribe to the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's really easy to do. You can subscribe on our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can also subscribe on the iHeartRadio app on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Himalaya, Ghana, Stitcher Radio, Good Pods. Wherever you find your podcast, you can find the Reading with Your Kids podcast. And also, please, 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 do let one or two people, friends, family, co-workers, let them know about the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It is the best way we can get the word about the podcast out there to the world. And it's also the best way that we can all work together to make the world a better place through reading. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Michael Cottman. Please be sure to check out Segregated Skies, David Harris's trailblazing journey to rise above racial barriers. I also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.